Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. Tonight, we have a very special group of guests. When we first started doing Bourbon Turntable, September of 21, we made a list of people that we wanted to have on the show at some point, and one of the people that was on that list was Dr. Pat Heist, and we are honored to have him with us tonight. And we are honored to also have Jerod Smith. So we're going to get to know these guys here in just a minute. But before we do that, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends that produce content for the bourbon enthusiast. We have shows like Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. I believe Pat's been on that show before. They talk about all things distillation. They may be talking with a distiller from the other side of the country or the other side of the world. So if you're looking to geek out on that, that is a show for you. We also have My Whiskey Den with Mike and Pat. On that show, Craft Whiskey is King. They have a show every Monday night, 9 o'clock live. So be sure to tune into them. Alan also has One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. That's where you have a question about anything distillation, you just email him and he'll do videos showing what his answer is, what his response is to those questions. And then, of course, you have Bourbon Turntable, and we'll tell you more about where you can find us later on. But right now, if you're watching us on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button. We would love to have you with us. So, welcome to Bourbon Turntable, Pat and Jerod.
Great to be here.
Yeah, we're like I said, we've been wanting to have you guys on the show for a long time. Drew, unfortunately, is sick today as we're recording this, and he can't be with us. I know that he's disappointed, but that's just the breaks for him, I guess. So we're like I said, we're very excited to have you guys with us. And I guess to start out, Pat, tell us a little bit about what your background is that led you to Wilderness Trail. What was
Yeah.
your trail to Wilderness Trail?
Yep. So the trail to Wilderness Trail for me was microbiology and biochemistry. I've always, whenever I was in college, I started off as pre-med. And the first time I ever took a microbiology class, I switched my major over to that. And so I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in microbiology and then ended up with a master's and a PhD in plant pathology, which kind of veered over into the agricultural side. So I got a lot of experience working with farmers on different diseases of field crops, tobacco, vegetable crops, grain crops. I did quite a bit of work in turf grasses like a golf course greens and that kind of stuff. And migrated from plant pathology to medical microbiology. I was a medical microbiology professor for 7 years over at the Pikeville College. There's osteopathic medical school over there. So I did that for several years and kind of, honed out my microbiology skills on, not only plant microbe interactions, but human microbe interactions, which introduced me to a lot of bugs and drugs concepts. What type of a medication do you use to treat this bacteria versus that bacteria, or this fungi versus this virus? And actually, it was while I was at the medical school that my business partner, Shane Baker, and I, we've been friends for years. We actually met each other playing in a rock band. We'll get to that in the music session. But we started Firm Solutions while I was a professor over at the medical school. And Firm Solutions markets yeast and fermentation products and technical support to breweries and distilleries. So, one thing about being a yeast provider is the yeast gets the blame for every problem that a distillery or a brewery has. So if the fermenter's not bubbling right, then you call the yeast provider and ask them, what the hell's going on here? How come this damn yeast isn't working? So about 1,000 distilleries and breweries later, after troubleshooting in different bacterial contamination. If you're fermenting grains, you've got to convert the starch successfully to fermentable sugars. There's all kinds of problems that, grain quality can be an issue, high moisture, low starch. There's different issues that can occur. And we use our laboratory to help other distilleries and breweries solve those issues. So at some point in time, it just kind of clicked. It's like, hey, man, we're getting phone calls from some of the most famous master distillers in the world, helping them with all their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got capital coming from this very healthy fermentation company. We've got all this know-how. Let's start a distillery. And Wilderness Trail came out of that. And, we started off pretty meager beginnings. We did 1 barrel a day, 3 to 4 days a week. So we were probably 200 to 300 barrels a year starting. And then we expanded and expanded again. And today we do about 215 to 220 barrels a day, 7 days a week.
Wow. How long did you have Firm Solutions going before you started Wilderness Trail?
So we started Firm in 2006 and really got rolling in 2007. Basically right in the middle of the economic crisis.
Right.
Not the best time to start a company, but we actually did pretty good. And just like Luke Skywalker, when he was shooting out of the Death Star right at the last minute before it blew up, we kind of came out of that and ended up, in a position to start Wilderness Trail 6 years later. So 2007 to 2013 is when we distilled our first products at Wilderness Trail. So our oldest barrel actually it just turned 9 years old on October the 31st, a couple months ago.
Wow. Well, I want to get back to that a little bit, and we want to get to know Jerod a little bit more. But before we do that, I want us to start tasting some whiskey while we're talking.
Oh yeah.
So, one thing that I've been following and drinking Wilderness Trail for a while, and I noticed at one point on the label, and I love the label because it tells you the mash bill and it tells you a lot about it, and it says on here on this bottle I have that it is copper pot distilled. And then I noticed at some point it changed to copper column distilled. Okay, same mash bill, and both of these are bottled in bond. But I've always been curious about, okay, what, and we'll talk a little bit about why that change was made in a little bit. But I've always been curious. I thought if I ever get a chance to drink some whiskey with Pat Heist, I'd like to be able to taste this side by side, and let's just talk about what the differences are, if anything. And so I've sent samples to Dr. Heist and to Jerod, and I sent them blind. I sent them what I called optional blind. So some people, I don't want anybody to ever think that it's trying to gotcha. Okay, so if you want to open the little legend there, you can see which one's which, or you can taste them blind, whatever you want to do. So
yeah, I'm gonna taste them blind.
All right, so we'll go with sample A first then. And this is the wheated bourbon, 24% wheat. Is that correct? I remember that right?
Yep, 24% wheat, 64 corn, 24 wheat, 12% malted barley.
Right. And your rye is just the same mash bill. You just
the high rye
bourbon, and you just put rye in there.
Yep. And then it's 24% rye. Yeah, I really like that. Now, some differences between, whenever you're distilling in a pot versus a column, the distiller's beer, the alcohol containing end product of fermentation, that sits in the pot for 5 to 6 hours while you're, adding heat and boiling off all the alcohol. So, one major difference between a pot still is you've got that material in there cooking for hours.
Right.
In a column still, the mash or the beer rather, only spends 1 to 2 minutes in that column before the stillage comes out. So there's only a 2-minute exposure period to that high heat. And so, there are likely inherent physical, differences, thermodynamic type of differences between, when you look at especially when you look at heads, hearts, and tails. So I mean, we don't know. We haven't studied it in depth enough to know. We're very happy with how the distillate shifted from the pot still to the column still. And actually, I'm going to try sample number B here.
Okay.
I tried the A there, and I really like it.
I feel really convinced on my convictions on these, so I hope I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'll say, and if you have the bottles there, if the first sample, which was pot still, would certainly have been a single barrel.
Yes.
And it probably says it on there. And I wonder if the column still is a single barrel or if it's small batch.
It is a single barrel also.
Okay, so that's good.
Yep.
That's good. That was one thing I was just going to point out if that was a difference. Now, I will say that sample B, to me, it tastes a little bit young compared to sample A. And so I wonder, and actually, since those are both single barrel, you can tell us what the barrel number is on the front of A versus B. Well, I mean, if you tell us that, you're going to tell us what pot still versus column. But actually, more importantly, it would be like, for example, if B was like, if it started with the number 18 or 19, it wouldn't surprise me, which would mean that it's right at 4 years. So, because, I mean, as we've kind of gone from our supply demand right now is, we don't have the supply to meet the demand.
Right.
And so we're kind of, we're always coming into more and more barrels, but sometimes on our inventory, we're cutting it a little bit close. Like, maybe in one instant, an average of everything we're putting out is 5.5 years old. And then things get a little bit tight. And then all of a sudden we're putting out 4 years and 3 months stuff. And then all of a sudden we catch back up on our age again because, we're making 70,000 barrels now, whereas the bottles we're bottling are from a year where we only laid back 2,000 barrels. So the dynamics, can change. And so that's one observation that I have about these two samples. I wouldn't. I mean, I could guess which one I think's the pot still, but it would simply be a guess.
Okay.
There's really no, as far as other differences that we've noticed, whenever stills run a certain way, any particular still, there is a particular temperature profile that still is going to, you're either fighting against it or it'll equilibrate at a certain temperature. And when I say temperature, I'm talking about, when you look at a column, the stratification of, it's hotter at the bottom than it is at the top.
Right.
And for example, our still is 199 Fahrenheit at the top, 213 at the bottom. So the temperature of the vapor going to the first condenser is very important in the way that we are venting off our heads. The other thing is the temperature of the vapor going to the condenser is what determines the proof. And so I can tell you by just being in the distillery running our pot still back in the early days, we were targeting in on a vapor temperature of about 184 degrees Fahrenheit, which will get you a proof of about 144. On our columns, they run closer to 137, 138. This is the vapor temperature off our doubler, which is going to be our high wines that are going to go into the barrel. Now, those run closer to 137, 138, which is about 100 or 186 to 187 degrees Fahrenheit, rather, which is 137 to 138 proof. So we were coming off the still, our column stuff, a little lower proof, slightly lower than our pot. So that's another observation that I can just share with you based on running them.
Okay. So the proof off of the pot was what again?
Like 144.
Okay. And you're looking at like 137 off the column.
Yep. So that would be one difference. So there's going to be more of a dilution to the one coming off the pot slightly. Again, 137 versus 142 to 144 that's an extra percent or two of alcohol. It's not huge, but that's one difference. And then, of course, on a pot still, you're taking manual cuts, your heads, your hearts, and your tails, whereas your heads and your tails cuts are made kind of automatically on a column setup because you're condensing at 2 points. We condense at a very high temperature on our low wines so that our heads remain volatile. They just get vented outside the building. And then our tails, any tails that make it over to the doubler, we're 186, 187 degrees vapor. So any, like if you think of the boiling point of like propyl alcohol, which is one of the tails components, that's like in the 220s degrees. So all that would be left behind in the doubler.
And what are you going in the barrel with? Is that barrel entry
point? 110.
Same for both?
110. Yeah. So we're making a dilution. Yeah. So either in pot still or column, we'd be going in at 110.
Okay.
Now on some of our rye whiskeys, we've gone in as low as 100. So if you get like I just had a barrel pick the other day that was like 96.8 proof, which would have been one that went in at 100.
Yeah. That's you're not losing a lot at all there then.
No.
Okay. So what are your thoughts, Jerod, on what you're tasting between A and B?
Yeah, so A is column distilled, B is pot distilled, and I'm convicted of that. I just know I've drank so much of our whiskey through the years.
Yeah.
I just know it. So I know really two things kind of convince it for me. Number one was there's a certain flavor I got off sample B that I recognize from our younger whiskeys. It's kind of almost a candy Scotch flavor in there. It's like a not really butterscotch, but like a sweet Scotch flavor. And then secondly, it is just so far off of what we normally make, like that flavor profile. And not to like steal Pat's thunder for what he'll talk about here in a little bit, but I will quote Pat in that something he always says is that consistency is the mark of a professional, and that's something that the column still gives you over the pot still. It's just pretty much instantly recognizable which one really kind of hit that Wilderness Trail umbrella of flavor that we see nowadays constantly versus an outlier. Now it is a single barrel, so there can be a big outlier even in that. But then that one certain flavor though convinces me though. So I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they're both really good though, in my opinion. The B sample, what'd you think about the youngness of it, Jerod? Did you kind of get that little bit of youthfulness?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like usually that youthfulness you can taste it kind of with the wood component. I didn't really get it with the wood component here, but it reminded me almost a little bit of our harvest rum, Pat. Like just a little bit of that. It was very sweet. Because we don't get our wheat is so damn good, but it's not the sweetest wheat out there. It's not it's not like that. It's definitely good, and it's good to kind of taste that. And it kind of makes me think of just back in the day, man. Pat talks about that 9-year-old barrel we have. Take a guess how much is in there, Pat? Because like we've sampled on that barrel so much.
A little bit of a lift, and it came up off the rack a little bit, so it looks like bullets hit it. I remember when we first barreled that. It's like, hey man, this stuff's 1 day old. Let's try it. Day number 2, it's twice as old as it was yesterday. Let's have it. So we got into it, and I remember like it was probably into year 2 before we just came to the conclusion that young whiskey just doesn't taste good. And I mean, we were wondering like, did we do this right? And we're very fortunate to have friends at other distilleries that we could call and, hey man, can we come over to your place and try some of your 1 year and 2 year? And then we try theirs and it tastes like shit too. So we're like, oh yeah, we must be on the right track. It tastes just as bad.
I'm not as negative on younger whiskey if it's made to be younger whiskey. If you're making really tight cuts on it, and if you're aging it in a certain way in the barrel, I think younger whiskey can still be good, and it can still provide a variety for a whiskey drinker to choose from, a different type of experience to have. But yeah, Jerod, you are correct. Sample B is the pot, and there's a funkiness that comes off of a pot still, and I don't know exactly how to better describe that, but there is a certain funkiness that you get off of a lot of pot still whiskey, and that's there with Sample B, and maybe part of that is it is maybe a little younger than Sample A, but I think both are very good, and I've enjoyed both over the years, but if this tells you anything, Sample A, the barrel number is 17B02C. So what does that little code tell me?
That means that the 17 would be 2017. That's when it was barreled. So
Right.
B, well, it was B what? What was the number?
February. That's alpha. It's going to be alpha
Okay.
to the calendar month.
17B02C.
So that was February the 2nd, 2017 is when that would have went into the bottle.
Okay.
Or no, into the barrel.
Into the barrel, yeah.
And that was the third barrel that day, I guess, right, Pat? For the C.
Yeah. We've changed our like the hyphenated numbers to reflect the shifts and to reflect because now we run 2 columns. So we have an 18-inch diameter column and a 36-inch diameter.
Oh, wow.
So we make annotations on the batch numbers nowadays that reflect shifts and column and that kind of stuff. Now, your remark about the pot still stuff kind of having a funkiness to it. You know, one thing that we know just working with hundreds of distilleries that operate pot stills, and then, you know, even looking back at the beginning of Wilderness Trail, you know, a lot of times when you're operating a pot still, it's fairly low volume. Okay. And whenever you don't have, you know, industrial sized equipment, sometimes there are deficiencies in how you clean those, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes pot distilled stuff, it's funky because of the kind of a rudimentary way that you have to ferment in a small tank versus a tank that's got proper agitation, proper, you know, ability to clean, et cetera, et cetera. And even though we're Firm Solutions and we specialize in helping people to resolve bacterial contamination, there's still going to be from time to time a little bit of that gets you because you're just on a very rudimentary style of a distillery because it's just a very small scale. So I think that's another observation with respect to what you're saying about pot still stuff.
And I don't say that as a negative. I think it adds character. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, Kevin, I get that on Sample B also.
Yeah. And if I can add something to your comment about young whiskey. Yeah, young whiskey can be good if the distiller's craft is good, because it does show through in young whiskey. You can tell a young whiskey made from Wilderness Trail or made by Allen up at French Lick versus I won't name any other names, but maybe some tourist distillery on the East Coast is doing a rum or something like that. You know, you can tell the same difference in a 1-year-old. And to that effect, like last night I had a bottle of rum from Myrtle Beach that I took a drink of just out of pure curiosity, because you know rum can have all these additives and stuff, right? All this stuff. So on the label it says, you know, aged about 1 year or whatever, and it's actually pretty good. Like it was very light in color, didn't have any, you know, coloring added to it. I'll say pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't have bought a bottle for $40, but you could definitely tell the distiller had some skill and made a good spirit, even though it was young. It's still a good spirit. So that does shine through if it's made with skill.
It's you have to begin with the end in mind. You know, if your plan is, okay, we're wanting to age this a certain, you know, 8 years, okay, then fine. Then you don't want to drink it at 2 years, right? Because it's not where you want it to be. It's not matured. It's not grown up. And so to me, that if you're taking shortcuts, that's where you get into bad whiskey, whether it's young or whether it's been, you know, in a barrel for a dozen years. If you're taking shortcuts and you're not taking the time to do it right at the outset, then you're not going to get what anybody will really want out of a bottle.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents. We
Right.
work with, like I said, hundreds of different breweries and distilleries. And in the case of distilleries, you get to that 2-year mark and your goal is we're not opening anything till 8 years. And you're sitting here cleaning the lint out of your pockets after
Right.
2 years. And it's like, holy crap, we got to do something.
Right.
So, I think that's kind of the temptation that gets some people. They go into it and they don't realize, if your goal is 8 years, that means you're going to be producing whiskey. You're going to be paying for labor. You're going to be buying raw ingredients. I mean, and when you get like the size of Wilderness Trail, I mean, we're grinding 1 million pounds of grain every 5 days. So if we had to make that investment, every week and then not get any money back for 8 years, that'd be painful. Not to mention we're building $12 to $15 million worth of storage facilities each year. And then what's 70,000 barrels times $200 a piece, just to give you an idea what the empty barrels cost.
Right.
So utilities, labor, et cetera, taxes.
Right.
I mean, you better be ready to strap in if you're in this business. Capitalization is just, and it's just amazing that we were able to do what we did and not take on any outside investors. We've always maintained the business between Shane and I, and we've always kept our bills paid. We've always been pretty broke the whole time, but we always kind of paid for things as we went along.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and pour the high rye small batch, which I think is labeled number 2 in what Jerod sent out. And while we're tasting that, Jerod, you didn't start out in the whiskey world, did you?
No, I didn't, man. My trail to Wilderness Trail is on Pat's coattails. Basically like that. I've just hitched my fortunes to Dr. Heist for about 15 years now, and just rode along. So, but no, I've always been a bourbon lover, man. I was kind of that looking back, kind of that cringy kid in high school who thought he was cool at the field parties, drinking Makers in the back of the truck versus Natty Light out of the keg, thinking I was sophisticated. But I've always had just a huge love of history, right? And being a Kentuckian and taking pride in that, Kentucky history is bourbon history. So bourbon was my drink because of that. And through my 20s, I was lucky enough, which is the early 2000s, when you could still get a whole lot of really good bourbon for cheap. So I was able to really cut my teeth and get my education, through what limited print material was available, and through the wonderful website of straightbourbon.com. That for years was the only source of good info. That website, and then the Pre-Pro website that was run by, I forget the couple that kept that up for many years. But yeah, that was basically it for bourbon. Always loved the stuff, for sure. I decided to, and let me mention that I've known Pat since probably about 15. Best friends with our distillery manager, his brother, Mike, who's been our distiller over the years, has done a great job. What you're drinking on the pot still stuff most likely was made by Pat's brother, Mike. But we've been boys since we was 12. Yeah. So I've just known Pat tangentially through all of his eras as mullet man, as a student for 15 years, and then was so proud when we became Dr. Pat Heist. So it's really cool. I decided to go back to college in my late 20s, and I was so lucky to have the opportunity to get back with Mike and Pat working at Firm Solutions. So I was able to get there at Firm Solutions, helping them do stuff and kind of make enough money to keep going, for my undergrad and stuff. And, during the breaks of the day, we were a small company then. There were like 5 of us in the office or in the building. So, eating lunch together all the time and stuff, we were always just talking bourbon and sometimes drinking bourbon and all kinds of stuff like that. So after I graduated, I went on and got my master's, taught high school for a little bit. And they kind of went on and started Wilderness Trail Distillery. And I had some discussions with Pat and his partner Shane, and I quit the teaching profession, and they brought me on kind of as employee number 2, just to help get things going and bring my love and passion and knowledge of bourbon to Wilderness Trail. And it's just been a wonderful ride and relationship, man.
Yeah.
I've had a great career there. I've been lucky to start at a very small company and have it grow into what it is.
Yeah.
It's really given me the unique educational experience of knowing our company in and out. I've read the stills, I've ground the corn, I've helped with farms, I've cleaned many toilets, I have done a whole lot of tours. I just really know that place inside and out. So yeah, it's just really given me the great opportunity of Pat and Shane's success, to make that my success and grow my skill set. And my reputation, my profession with that, man. So it's been really great to have a great product too. I'm no salesman. My job is not sales. I'm brand marketing and education. But you don't have to sell this stuff, man. All I got to do is talk a little bit and let you have a drink, and it makes it super easy. So it's been great being in the business for a place that makes good liquor.
Right.
It'd be hard to do this every day and drink every day if it wasn't very good.
Yeah. A couple things I'll say about Jerod. First of all, if any of the listeners want to know how many tours it takes to reach a breaking point of sanity, Jerod, he could probably answer that question for you. And then another just observation, I was thinking back to, my personal bourbon collection. I would bet that any Weller 12, Elmer T. Lee, Sazerac Rye, anything Pappy is probably got fingerprint or two of Jerod's on it.
Yeah. Well, one legendary year of 2013, I got 11 bottles of Van Winkle stuff. And of course I couldn't afford all that crap, even at MSRP, had a young family at that point and everything. So Pat has been kind of my benefactor in that, like I'll have my contacts at a store.
He had to keep the supply going. So he had to put the bottle somewhere or he'd lose his contact. So I was happy to oblige as the bunker.
Yeah. Pat's kind of been my bourbon sugar daddy in a way. Like, keeping that pipeline going. Like, man, like this guy's offered me this bottle of birthday bourbon. Like, I really don't need it. And but man, I know next time he offers something, it might even be better. So I'll rip Pat. Pat's like, hell yeah, man, get that. So
yeah, and this is this has been a dry hole for about 3 or 4 years now. So we're talking about in the past.
Yeah, it's been over for a little bit.
About the time that Pappy went for $350, Pappy 23 went up to $350 on the secondary market, and I said, I'm done.
Yeah,
no more for me.
Yeah, but Pat's had 2 boxes of the old Rip 107 in the Glencairn Crystal decanter set, single barrel, right? Yeah, you've gone through 2 bottles of that, haven't you? Yeah, man.
No, I've only got one. Shane's got one.
Okay. Oh yeah, he was offered a second one. That's one of those regret things.
It's not single barrel because I think there's 1,100 bottles. But it's barrel. No, it's 107 proof. Yeah. So it's more like the Weller Antique, but it's a 23-year Pappy. Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about some of the big name allocated heritage brands. When you started Wilderness Trail, was there a specific flavor profile that you were going for, a Wilderness Trail profile, if you will? And was there were there brands out there that you're thinking, well, we want to be like this, we want to be like that, or what were your goals in that regard?
So, I mean, as Jerod mentioned, we're big bourbon fans going back, historically way the heck before we ever had our own distillery. So there's the bourbons that we all liked, which we've always gravitated towards, the old Stitzel Weller, old Fitzgerald, Weller, the Pappies, a lot of the old wheated recipes. We always wanted to highlight local grains, and wheat is something that's grown locally here.
Right.
Most distilleries here in Kentucky use rye in their recipe, but most distilleries don't use rye that's grown in Kentucky.
Right.
So, we wanted to feature local grains. So that was one of the reasons. There's also a little bit of history. Shane, his grandparents worked at the Stitzel Weller distillery. Right. Shane's grandmother actually has a very long history going back from Kentucky River Distilling to the old Fitzgerald / Stitzel Weller distillery in Louisville. And so there was some, documentation that we looked at that was kind of handed down from some of those old wheated bourbon recipes. So it was a combination of different factors.
Okay. And you started out with a wheated bourbon recipe, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And again, we wanted to feature local grains. So it took us about a year before we could get local rye, because we had to actually communicate with farmers and get that grown in a place that there's not been much success with rye. So we were able to find varieties. And this is kind of where, getting back to my agricultural education, working with agricultural extension, and utilizing the tools that we have at the professor level at the university down to local agricultural extension agents, and then kind of helping put the pieces together on that. And we've been successfully sourcing Kentucky grown rye now for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. What was that, a specific varietal that you helped to design, or were you just looking at different varietals of rye that are out there and thinking, okay, this could work in Kentucky?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, we didn't recreate the wheel or anything, but there are varieties that, again, our farmers and others have identified through their experience that grow actually very well here in Kentucky. And that's one thing that's kind of really different about our rye. Not that rye grown out of Kentucky isn't great too. It's just something that lends to the uniqueness of our products that have rye in them. And also we feel good about supporting local agriculture as well.
And a lot of people use the word terroir.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And are you a believer in that in terms of whiskey?
Yeah. In terms of, you can't make the same whiskey at two different distilleries located on two different properties. The grain that comes from Indiana is going to be different than the grains that come from Kentucky. Western Kentucky grain versus Eastern Kentucky grain. It's just, different soil types and different climate. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. Whenever we talk about differences, sweet mash versus sour mash, or Kentucky grown grains versus Tennessee grown grains, column versus pot still, usually we're talking about everything is all good. It's just different in different ways for all those different reasons. The proof you're coming off the still, the type of barrels you use, where, something else back to these two samples that we tried. Most of our early, if not all of our early pot still stuff was aged in our Rick House A, which is a 2,200 barrel house. It's 2 stories. You get into 2017, 2018, and you're into Rick House, a 10,000 barrel or a 24,000 barrel house. So think the dynamics in there are much different. So when we look at, parallels, not only was this pot versus column, but they were likely aged in 2 different warehouses.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, the way you have your rick houses laid out, they're not all facing the same geographical direction. You've got them at different angles. Was that intentional? Is that, as the chief science officer for Wilderness Trail, is that something that you wanted to try to do, just to see what differences you could get like that? Or was that
there was actually a very scientific algorithm for our barrel warehouse positioning, and it was basically, it can't lay over the road, it can't lay over a gas line. They have to be a minimum of 200 feet apart. They have to be properly bermed. So, we're not on a flat piece of property. It can't be like military bunkers right next to each other. So the way they're positioned throughout our property is to maximize the number of barrel warehouses that we can put on our land, given the restrictions and the distance they have to be from each other in the road and other structures. So there was a little bit of planning and zoning and different things. Shane, he's a mechanical engineer, and he's very, in our we have a VP of operations, Lynn Landry. Those guys are masters of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this high rye bourbon for just a second. And one thing that I get off of the high rye bourbon, as opposed to the wheated bourbon, is I get more fruit notes on the high rye bourbon. Is that a fair statement? Do you agree with that, or am I out in left field?
Yeah, I think the spiciness of the rye definitely brings like some floral and some other things. That the way I look at wheat is kind of like an open window to the barrel. Like it allows more of the barrel to come through, whereas the spiciness of the rye kind of covers a little bit of that up more.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up getting some more of those type of notes coming through. That's my opinion anyway. Jerod, he's over chomping at the bit. He's got something.
Yeah, Jerod, what do you got, buddy?
No, man, I agree with that. I concur with that. I think that our high rye bourbon consistently, like if I had to pick one of ours just to drink forever, it would be the high rye bourbon.
Yeah.
You know, just the rye still is very dynamic with a little bit of sweetness in there. It just makes it such a pleasant drink. And then it makes really good cocktails too. Like, I just love it. I use it almost exclusively over the wheated stuff in the cocktails, just for those little factors.
Yeah. When I have a little bourbon group called Bourbon Fellowship, and we've been meeting, I guess, for about 4 years now. And every March we do a bottled and bond bracket challenge. Now, to go along with NCAA tournament. Now, obviously, we don't do 64 samples of anything because we don't want to die that evening. But we'll do 8, and it'll be 8 different bottled and bond whiskeys each year. And in 2020, we did this and included both the wheated bourbon and the high rye bourbon. And the high rye bourbon was the champion, if you will, for that year. So
sweet. The lead 8.
Yeah, it was people. The way I had it set up is in round 1, I had the wheated against the high rye, just to, start out with that.
Eliminate one.
Right. And everybody had great things to say about both, but the wheated won out, and or excuse me, the high rye won out, and everybody really enjoys that to this day. So
nice.
Congratulations from almost 3 years ago.
Wait,
we'll take it.
Yeah,
we'll take it.
But I enjoy I enjoy both the wheated and the high rye. I think you get more vanilla and caramel and such in the wheated, and in the high rye I get some of that dark fruit, cherry, maybe even a little bit of graham cracker note in it. Really enjoy both of those, and they're still at a pretty reasonable price compared to where they were 4 years ago.
And actually we just got cheaper on our pricing too, so that's been a great thing.
Well, God bless Wilderness Trail then.
right we had some deflation going on. We've had some deflation going on, so yeah, we've done some changes over the last couple of years just to make a small operation more efficient. Like moving and more consistent too, like so moving single barrel rye and a single barrel wheated to a small batch has kept us more consistent with that and let us get more volume out with it. Too. Yeah, but sometimes on the high rye and the wheated, it's really hard to distinguish them. You do a blind on that, and you can be really, really fooled. Sometimes the wheated has such wonderful spice notes and flavor, and sometimes that high rye is just super sweet and light, and it's amazing how those happen with that.
That's probably when we accidentally screwed up in high rye. Whoops.
Well, a lot of people hear rye and they immediately think, "Oh, it's spicy." But I've done several blind tastings before where you've got anything from a wheat whiskey to a 100% or 95.5 rye, and with the different levels of rye and wheat content in between in a bourbon, and it never fails that people are picking oh well, this is the rye bourbon because it's spicier. Well, no, that's a wheated bourbon, and you can't just make those generalizations all the time about things in whiskey, because there are so many different variables, like you were talking about, Pat.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, something else I want to mention before I forget about it. We were talking about Jerod and the history and all this kind of stuff. And this is a bourbon and music show. A famous picture that I normally post once a year on social media is whenever my oldest daughter was 2 weeks old, I had a little bit of a dilemma. Gatewood Galbraith was running for governor, and Willie Nelson was putting on a free show there at the Red Mile in Lexington. And my wife was working, and I had to make a decision about how the hell am I going to get to that Willie Nelson concert with a 2-week-old baby. So I've got a picture of me and Jerod and my brother Mike with the 2-week-old child at the Willie Nelson concert.
That's a good dad right there. That's a really good dad.
We had to take the high road. Yeah, so we're pushing a stroller through bumpy fields at the Red Mile in Lexington, but we got in, we got out. It's a classic picture, though.
That's David, awesome. You want me to email that to you?
Yeah, do that. Yeah.
All right, man. I'll let you be able to share that then.
I'll get it up before we're done with the show. That's for sure.
All right.
We'll get that picture up. So during, I think, the last couple of years, you guys, Wilderness Trail has been earned the spot on the Heritage Trail.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you've made that transition from, let's just call it craft, for lack of a better word, to heritage. And part of that is you've gone from pot still to column, and you've certainly grown significantly. I think the last number I heard was you're the 14th largest distillery in the world. Yeah. So that's a lot. That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot in 10 years.
Oh yeah.
So how do you manage that transition from being a craft distiller that's making a barrel a day to being one of the largest bourbon distilleries in the world that's making over 200 barrels a day?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out myself, to be quite honest with you. I think just, recognizing opportunities whenever they presented themselves. We kind of got into contract production at first. We couldn't afford to lay down 75,000 barrels just for ourselves, but we sure benefited from that contract production. So we went full on, initially whenever we increased our production to where we're the capacity we're at now. We were able to take advantage of a lot of that in contract production, which is get paid today to make it next week. And so that helped capitalize the facility and allowed us to, lay back more barrels for our own brand. And so we've kind of been, this much contract production, this much Wilderness Trail, to now we got this much Wilderness Trail, and we're phasing out contract production.
Is the contract production becoming a lower amount simply because are you still doing around the same number of barrels for that, but it's just lower percentage because you've grown so much, or are you really reducing those number of contract barrels?
Partnership with Campari Group, a good example, and we're just now starting that, the first year of that relationship. But, the goal is to lay back as many Wilderness barrels as we can.
Right.
And then whatever barrels that they need out of this relationship, there's that option as well. So, I think we're definitely kind of phasing out contract production in lieu of making barrels for ourselves.
Right. So there's a missing piece to the market then, if you guys are getting out of contract distillation, and MGP apparently is saying that they're wanting to reduce that as well.
Yeah.
I guess that's just all the more work for Bardstown Bourbon Company.
Well, you got Bardstown Bourbon, you got Green River.
Yeah.
There are multiple distilleries being constructed right now, through our Firm Solutions company we're working with. You got Danny Potter and Jane that just departed from Maker's Mark. They've already isolated property over in Springfield, Kentucky. We have a distillery going in called All Nations, which is just east of us over here in Garrett County. So there's a lot of activity. And I think a lot of, any deficiencies that are going to be left because we're exiting the contract production are going to be more than made up for all these expansions that are occurring and these new distilleries coming on.
Yeah. There's a lot of money going into to bourbon expansion
Yeah.
all over the place. So
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back for a second and talk about I guess the relationship between Farm Solutions and Wilderness Trail and your scientific background. Um, I mean, I think I'd heard at one point you had over 9,000 different yeast strains at Firm Solutions. I mean, that may be a little bit dated.
No,
Is that
that's
still?
right. Yeah, it's probably 10, 12,000 now.
Yeah.
We're constantly where we work with distilleries and breweries all over the world. We're definitely interested in whatever. If we're not supplying the yeast, then we want to know what it is. How does it compare? So we have a lot of information about what yeast different producers are using and how does it, beer yeast versus distiller's yeast or hard seltzer yeast versus a rum yeast. So there's just all these different factors. And then where we're doing a lot of microbiology work for not only distilled spirits and beer producers, but also non-alcoholic beverage producers like kombucha and kefir, even a little bit of sauerkraut and vinegar and soy sauce and menma, which is fermented ramen or fermented bamboo shoots that you put in the ramen. So there's all kinds of different things we're getting into. And when we interact with these different, sometimes very kind of weird stuff, we're getting new microbes. So anytime we culture bacteria or yeast, we're going to put that in our collection. And so, I mean, we've got yeast that we've cultured from kombucha that might be really excellent to make whiskey from. It's just at 10,000 strains, it would take us a long time to really, we're not trying to recreate the wheel here either. It's very well known how to make great quality whiskey here in the state of Kentucky. And you can guarantee that over the centuries, people have tried all these weird things. Let's use this heirloom grain. Well, how come you think everybody has settled on number 2 yellow dent corn? Because it just works the best. It's the most economical. It's got the best flavor. So we're not here trying to do, even though we've got all this scientific knowledge, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Our integrity and our knowledge tells us don't do something totally different, because then you don't know what it's going to taste like. Do well what you know how to do and what people have been doing and what people have evolved to do. And then we want a little bit of creativity, but we want to make the best bourbon in the world first and foremost.
And I'm going to say this and risk sounding like an idiot in front of Dr. Heist, being one of the, if not the most foremost yeast experts in the world. When I look at yeast in distillation, I look at it as it's got really 2 primary functions. One is kind of a blue collar function. One's more of an artistic function. One is the scientific aspect of it is converting sugar into alcohol. And then the other is there a flavor element that's adding to a whiskey? How do you see that? How do you work that in Wilderness Trail or with your clients that you work with at Firm Solutions? What are your goals in that balance? And is that really a balance at all in your mind?
Yeah. So out of the 10,000 different yeasts that we have in our collection, we only market about 9 of those for distilleries. And those are going to be, and so you obviously everybody wants to make the best tasting whiskey possible. So any of our yeast are going to cover that base. You're going to make a great rum, you're going to make a great whiskey, you're going to make a great rye, you're going to make whatever the heck you want to make. And their yeast, and again, we're going to use beer yeast to make beer. We're not going to use a beer yeast to make a distilled spirit, because there's different other performance variables that we want to consider. So let's just say all the yeast that we have are going to make a great tasting product. But the other things you want to be considering are, what is the temperature tolerance of that strain? What if my fermenter gets over 100 degrees? Is it going to die out? Is it going to withstand that, continue utilizing the sugar? I don't want to lose out on 15 barrels every batch because I have a heat non-tolerant yeast strain. Also, the length of time that it takes to ferment. We're able to finish a fermentation in 2 days. So with 6 tanks, we're able to turn 3 tanks every day, because every other day we're resetting that tank and we're distilling the contents. So if I've got a yeast strain, some yeast strains require being held at 65 degrees, and they're not going to finish the sugar for 10 days. We'd have to have 36 fermenters instead of 6 fermenters if our yeast didn't ferment in a timely fashion. So there are flavor considerations, which everybody wants. You never have to worry about that with any yeast that we've selected for use in distilled spirits.
Right.
It's above and beyond that. What type of performance variables are you needing? And if you have 4 or 5 days to ferment, then maybe we can give you a little more economic yeast strain. And then it just depends on what your goals are.
Right. Right. Because, you look at like Four Roses, they've got their different yeast strains that they use that produce different flavor profiles in their single barrels. So I'm guessing that when you're talking with your clients about the different yeasts that you offer, are you telling them, well, you're going to get more of a floral note with this yeast, you're going to get more of a fruity note with this yeast, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, you can say that, but really it comes down to, if you're fermenting rye, you're going to get a distillate that tastes like rye. If you're fermenting sugar, you're going to get a distillate that tastes like rum. If you're fermenting molasses, you're going to get a distillate that tastes like rum.
Right.
The yeast is definitely important. I mean, the yeast makes 100% of all the alcohol. So take the alcohol away from a distilled spirit, and what do you have? Nothing. So the yeast is very important. But in terms of people get real hung up on yeast strains. Like, oh my God, do I use 921, 927, 917, 900? Which one? It's like, pick one and start with it and make a spirit to where you know what to expect.
Right.
Then change. And you're going to see that it's not going to be like apples and oranges. Now, you change you take the rye out of a recipe and replace it with wheat. That's going to be a real change. You take and distill it or put it into a 3-month air dried barrel instead of a 12-month air dried barrel. And that's going to be a big, big difference. Yep. So there are things that the yeast is a little bit more minor. I mean, I don't ever want to take away from the magic of the yeast, but we've kind of figured out a lot of that stuff for people. Yeah. So, and the same thing as far as our relationship with Firm Solutions of Wilderness Trail, we're guiding Wilderness Trail on, again, our goal has always been to make the best bourbon in the history of mankind.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, kind of like we were saying before, begin with the end in mind. Okay. Yeah. You know that you're going to be, this is what your mash bill is going to be. This is how you're going to age it. This is the kind of cooperage you're going to use. And so all of that kind of flows in together. And if you change one of those elements, then you've got to change what your goals are or what your perception is of what that end product's going to be. Right?
That's right. Or get more fancy with blending or, that kind of stuff.
Right. Oh, this stinks. I'm going to, age it in a sherry barrel for 6 months or what.
Well, if I could add to that, Kevin, yes, I'm one of Four Roses' biggest fans, man. I mean, I literally bought over hundreds and hundreds of bottles in my life of them. I've got 13 bottles in my cabinet right now. Yep. And I used to thought OESD. Yeah, that's my recipe. It's not, man. It's more that barrel. I've tried so many of the single barrels with different yeast strains, and for me, I've never been able to get any consistent flavor from that yeast strain that I could be perceptive enough to pick up on.
Yeah. I think that it may be there in very subtle ways, but there are so many other elements that come into play that there probably aren't a lot of people on the planet that can accurately select. Okay, that's a OBSK.
Yeah, well, I guarantee you too that whenever they were giving those tasting notes for those yeast strains, it wasn't off a finished distilled spirit. It was probably off of some malt or some kind of fermentation.
New make
for the tasting
level. Yeah, whenever you smell, like I do, Moonshine University, we set up 10 different identical mash recipes with 10 different yeast strains, and at that stage, you can pick the mash up, smell it, taste it if you want, and a lot of times the whole class is like, I like this one strain the best. It's like there's very defined opinions on it. Now you take that same material and you make a distillate from it. Now things are more concentrated and it's a little more difficult to pick out those nuances. So you kind of got to be careful about, I want to pick my yeast based on how the beer smells, because really what's distillate tastes like. That's really what it comes down to. And normally if the beer smells good, it's going to make a good distillate. So that's kind of one goes into the other. But like I said, there's the flavor, and then there's also those performance variables. Okay. And something else, furthermore, I will say this, and whenever we look at recipes, mash recipes, 64% corn, 24% wheat, 12% malted barley, 927 yeast strain, you're still negating to mention the contaminating organisms that are invariably going to be in that batch. And so when you get to older distilleries, arguably Four Roses would fit in that case. Not arguably, for sure. It's an older distillery, and those older distilleries, and that's why they use sour mash production process to mitigate microbial contamination. So whenever you've got 3 or 4 organisms that are in each batch, but they're not anywhere listed on the OBSK or the mash recipe or anything, you also have to consider how do those, and those were never even listed in. You were never even given the option to know that those are in there. So, and that's just where, when you look at the sophisticated nature of our industry and where we're coming from versus where we want to take it, Wilderness Trail, we're paying really close attention. We've got chemical indicators that tell us when bacteria are present. And when they are, we have the option to culture those organisms. And then 4 or 5 years later, when we're tasting that whiskey, and Jerod says, golly, how come this one's got just an unbelievable, toffee note to it? Well, we'll say, hey, man, let's take those 3 contaminants that we pulled out of that batch and put them to the test. And sometimes you grow those organisms on a plate and you smell it. And it's like, holy shit, I know exactly where that one came from. And so figuring that out really kind of gives us more avenues for really making designer distillates and pinpointing reliably and consistently some of these flavors that we love so much.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. I'd like to follow you around for a day and do that kind of thing. So that's because that's just, the whiskey geek in me is just like going off on that. That is very cool to be able to isolate that to that level and then look at it and say, okay, well, how can we use this information and this profile that we really like, or this profile that we didn't like, and get better. Better. We've got a friend, Lenny Eckstein, who's owns Deer Hammer Distilling out in Colorado, and he says, I'll try anything. I'll try making anything because I'm going to learn from it. It may not be great whiskey, but I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to learn something good or something bad and be able to apply it to the next thing that I do and get better. So,
I think that's something that's made Wilderness Trail so great. That, and what I'm going to say, I want to put the caveat that we screw up every day. We make mistakes. But Pat and Shane, with what they did at Firm Solutions, literally gained 4 or 5 lifetimes worth of handling distillation problems. Because nobody ever called, Pat and it's like, hey man, the still's working great and liquor tastes good. Come on over and hang out, man. It was always like, hey man, my firm smells like baby poop and I need you to come save my job, right? So so our learning curve for making stuff, was much more shallow. Again, we still made mistakes and still do to this day. But yeah, we was really able to learn from a lot of those mistakes of others, and even mistakes of others that were masters. Because there's no graduation date in the world of bourbon, right? You're always learning. Right. So it was really cool to, as we kind of jumped right in, to be able to make pretty good juice, right off the bat with that, and to be able to have an idea, like Pat said, of what he wanted to make. And for a little bit of insider Wilderness Trail lore, it wasn't like Pat Shane went through 1,000 different recipes, finding the perfect one. I think our wheated recipe started off as B4, and now we do B5. So basically, after on the 4th try, had it pretty nailed in pretty good. Did a couple slight modifications, and we've got B5. And then our rye mash bill is the first one because we just swapped that wheat and the rye out.
Right.
So being able to have that experience saved a lot of trial and error, and honestly a lot of years of waiting till the stuff got to be 3 and 4 years old and drinking like, man, this tastes like shit. What do we do? They kind of knew what to expect. We're able to really hit the ground running with it. So thanks for everybody else for the screw ups. It really helped us out. And also paid the bills for us too. So.
All right. Well, we're going to start the transition over to talking about music. I may have one more distillery question on the flip side of this, but we'll start to round out side A of the show and get to side B. But before we do that, we want to tell you about our friends over at Stave and Bean Coffee. John Wadle and Corey Welch. They've started this company, and they've been going for, I guess, about a year and a half now. And they make a fantastic coffee bean. Alan Bishop's got some that he's privately aged in some barrels as well. So you can go to Alan's website and order that there. John and Corey just recently have put together a trailer. So they are using that now taking Stave and Bean mobile. But if you have not tried Stave and Bean coffee, it is by all reports fantastic, and I've given it away as gifts many times. I'm not a big coffee drinker myself, but everybody that I know that's ever had it has had nothing but really good things to say about it. So check out staveandbean.com and tell them that we sent you. So
hey, if I could, Kevin, real quick, I'm so lucky to call Corey and John friends, man. I just want to give Corey a shout out. Not only do they do great things with Stave and Bean, and we do have a Wilderness Trail Stave and Bean offering now as well. But Corey has been my road dog, OG Wilderness Trail fan for a long, long time, man. Corey has been with us, supporting us, and it means a whole lot, man. He's a guy that so lucky in this job, man. Meet so many cool people and get to call him a friend, and John too. John,
we met him down at the New Orleans Bourbon Festival.
We did. Me and Pat down there. That was 2017.
I mean, Corey's one of the only people that I know of that's actually sold antique decanter whiskey bottles out of his truck at our distillery. So, not sure that's
that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
Corey's always working. But yeah, those guys are great. I love them, and they're doing a great job and have had some really good success with their company. So we're glad to be able to put in a little plug for them every chance we get. So we had such a huge show with Dr. Pat Heist and Jerod Smith from Wilderness Trail that we're dividing that up into 2 parts. So this is the end of part 1. Be sure to tune into part 2 next week, where we'll be talking a little bit more whiskey and a lot more music. Dr. Heist is big into music. He's a musician himself. He has his own band. They actually founded the relationship between Pat and Shane Baker started with a band called Fulcrum. And you'll hear more about that in next week's show. So for Dr. Heist, you can find him on Instagram at Dr._Pat_Heist. You can find Jerod at Jerod Ray Smith. And of course, the distillery is at Wilderness Trail Distillery. As for Drew, we are glad to hear that he is feeling better. And here are some of the shows that he's got coming up. This particular show that you're watching right now is dropping on the 18th of January. So you'll still have a chance to see him at O'Shea's 2 nights in a row, the 20th and 21st. He's got a gig at the Golden Nugget with his band, and another gig at the Golden Nugget solo, and another band gig at O'Shea's, and then another one, 2-nighter solo at O'Shea's. So a lot of good stuff coming up for Drew. As for our show, Bourbon Turntable, hit the subscribe button where you are right now. Get us on YouTube, watch the show, get us on your favorite podcast platform and listen to the show. Get into our Facebook page where we post all of our shows. Get us on our Facebook group where we can talk about the whiskey that you're drinking and the music that you're listening to while you're drinking it. So until next time, when we have part 2 of Pat Heist and Jerod Smith. Cheers, love, and Freebird. Good night.